Hey mamas, Sam McCormick here. Today I wanted to talk about something interesting, which is a huge thing in our country, and it is the 7 ways in which milk is actually making you sick. And it's not just milk, it's all dairy products, which is huge in the US because I grew up believing that we had to drink milk to have strong bones. And so I consumed a ton of milk before I started on my health and wellness journey. And I never realized it when I was consuming these dairy products, but I was actually having an allergic reaction to them. So when I cut them out, I can no longer eat cheese, I can't consume any yogurt, I can't drink milk without it really upsetting my stomach, which is crazy because, like I said, I grew up eating cheese all of the time on pizza and drinking milk like crazy, but it actually is really bad for you. So I wanted to talk about the 7 ways in which milk and dairy products are making you sick. Today, Americans consume an enormous amount of dairy. The intake of the average American is estimated to be over 600 pounds of dairy products per year, which sounds crazy when you look at the number, but when you consider how much cheese and milk you probably consume in a day, if you are still eating dairy, it's a lot. Dairy foods, including cow's milk, have actually not been a part of the diet of adults for the vast majority of human evolution. And in fact, in the US, consumption of cheese only really ramped up after 1977 because low-fat products started to be pushed into the mainstream. So factories were taking the fat off of the milk and turning it into cheese, and so they started these huge marketing campaigns to eat more cheese. So again, intensive and successful marketing by the dairy industry, including slogans like "Milk, it does a body good" and "Got milk," have reinforced a broadly ingrained belief that dairy is good for our health. But is it really? It's not. So here are 7 ways that dairy products are actually making you sick. The first is that even organic milk usually contains hormones. Commercial cow's milk contains large amounts of estrogen and progesterone, which is a serious health concern. Modern dairy cows have been genetically altered to continuously produce milk even throughout their repeated pregnancies, which is not natural. If you think about humans, when we produce milk, we only produce milk after we've given birth for our babies. And this means that even milk products that are labeled organic or no hormones added usually contain high levels of these problematic hormones, which are naturally produced by the cows because they have been genetically altered to keep producing the milk. These hormones can cause serious issues for men and women alike, and they have been linked to early sexual maturation and other issues in children. The second way that dairy products are making you sick is casein, which is a protein found in dairy, has been linked with an increased risk of cancer development. There have been a bunch of studies done that show that this protein in dairy, it's called casein, that it facilitates the growth and development of cancer. In fact, some studies even found that cancer development could be controlled more by casein levels in diet than by exposure to the underlying carcinogen, which means that this protein in dairy is causing cancer. The third reason that milk and dairy products are making you sick is that you are at a higher risk of type 1 diabetes and multiple sclerosis. Our immune system normally protects us from microbes and other harmful substances, but if it loses its ability to recognize and distinguish harmful substances from normal tissues and cells, it can instead mount attacks against our own body, which means our body is fighting itself. These auto attacks can be triggered by exposure to foreign peptides, which means the animal protein fragments that are found in dairy, which have similarities to the components in the human body. This can result in our immune system becoming confused and misidentifying tissues in our body as foreign, and thus in need of being attacked and destroyed, which means again that our body is attacking itself, which causes immune diseases. Dairy is associated with increased risk of several immune-related disorders. from allergic conditions to autoimmune diseases, many of these are life-changing and difficult to treat. Particularly concerning are the risks for type 1 diabetes, which only occurs in children, and MS. So if you are feeding your children lots of milk, you may want to rethink that because it causes a lot of diseases in children. The fourth reason that milk is bad for you is that even pasteurized milk contains microorganisms. Now, these microorganisms are commonly known as Salmonella, Listeria, and E. coli. These are some of the more common foodborne outbreaks that have been associated with dairy. And not even our food regulatory agencies expect that milk will be sterile after pasteurization. The heating process is done merely to reduce, not eliminate, the amount of microorganisms. So you could still become infected with one of these microorganisms, which can make you seriously ill and possibly even cause death. The fifth reason that dairy is making us sick is that dairy products accumulate pesticides in higher concentrations. Now, exposure to pesticides is another problem that is associated with dairy. While pesticide contamination affects water and agricultural lands generally, dairy products have a greater capacity to accumulate these pesticides in higher concentrations due in part to their high fat content. So when the cows are consuming these pesticides from the agricultural land, it is getting passed through to their milk. Even pesticides that have long been banned still show up when dairy products are tested. Some of these pesticides, like DDT, which was widely used in the past and is now banned as a human carcinogen, still persist in the environment and can more easily accumulate in animal food products, including dairy. So these pesticides are just another reason that dairy is causing cancer in your body. The sixth reason that dairy is making us sick is that we have increased exposure to antibiotic residue. Now, I know that we have all heard that we are now having these superbugs, especially with COVID. I know we are now almost over the pandemic. The reason that these superbugs are being created is because we are developing antibiotic resistance, and part of that is antibiotic hand soaps and things like that. But a lot of it is that the largest use of antibiotics worldwide is for livestock. So when you are consuming meat or dairy products, you are consuming some of these antibiotics, which is developing antibiotic resistance. And much of the antibiotic use is for non-therapeutic purposes, which means they're not giving to sick animals. They are giving them for feed efficiency and animal growth. So it's really unnecessary antibiotic use. And even though scientists have warned that these agricultural overuse of antibiotics is leading to antibiotic resistance, they still do it. It doesn't matter. So another reason that you are getting sick. And if you do get sick, antibiotics are not as effective because you are already consuming them in your meat and your dairy products. All right, number 7. This is my favorite because this is one that, again, like I said, when I grew up, I always thought that you had to consume dairy to have strong bones, but in fact, it's the opposite. Dairy can actually lead to bone problems. And this may come as a surprise to many, but dairy does not appear to be good for bone health. Not only has the body of scientific evidence been found inadequate to support the idea that dairy consumption promotes bone health, but numerous large-scale studies have found that consuming dairy may actually be detrimental to bone health. In fact, there are studies that have shown that the more dairy that you consume, the higher your risk for osteoporosis, and that is especially prevalent, important for us as mamas and as women to avoid osteoporosis, because as we know, we have a higher risk of developing osteoporosis because we create babies. And the U.S. has one of the highest rates of hip fractures in the world, despite our high milk intake. By contrast, in countries like Japan and Peru, where the average daily calcium intake is as low as 300 milligrams per day, which is less than a third of the U.S. daily recommendation for adults, which is usually much, much less than what we actually consume, the incidence of bone fractures is actually quite low. Fortunately, what I didn't know is that calcium is abundant in plant foods. So you will get plenty of calcium when you eat a whole food plant-based diet. You can get calcium in leafy green vegetables, legumes, and seeds, and often with higher absorption rates than the calcium in dairy. And of course, without all of dairy's associated health problems. My favorite way to get calcium is from broccoli. I love broccoli. But as a closing note, each mammalian species produces milk for its own babies, and the content of proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and minerals is specific to provide optimum nutrition for a baby of that particular species. The milk from an elephant, tiger, sea lion, and cow are each different from one another, and they are all different from human milk. When we think about it, the health problems associated with consuming the milk and dairy products of other species should not come as any surprise. No other species consumes milk regularly past the weaning period, and certainly not from another species. And as mentioned above, we humans have also not been doing so for the vast majority of our evolutionary history. Fortunately, with plant milks such as soy, almond, and rice now available, as well as delicious plant-based versions of other dairy products, it's never been easier or more convenient to completely avoid dairy. So I would highly recommend, if you haven't already, start giving up your dairy. Do it a little bit at a time because it is super hard. What I did for my family, because like I said, we consumed milk and cheese like crazy, is first we cut out milk and we replaced it with almond milk because we love almond milk. Almond Breeze is our favorite. And so we started to do that. And then once we got used to switching out the almond milk, we then switched out our butter. I love Country Crock plant butter, but whatever you choose, remember again to make sure you are reading the ingredients list. And then finally, we cut out cheese, which is by far the hardest because in America, we are so used to consuming tons and tons of cheese. But those are my recommendations for cutting dairy out of your diet. I would highly recommend you do so. If you guys have any questions, put them down below in the comments. And I hope you guys have an amazing day.